Okay, I'm ready to start if you guys are. It looks like it. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Accessible Graphic Design, hosted by the statewide IT Access Initiative under the Maryland Department of Disabilities. My name is Stephen Polacek. I am the IT Accessibility Program Specialist here at MDOD. Quick few housekeeping items. We do have an ASL interpreter today. They are spotlighted. If for whatever reason that is not working for you, make sure to go to their video feed and pin their video feed using the ellipsis button. If that isn't working, message me directly through chat. You should be able to do so. We also have live captioning available. So if you would like to use that, please click the closed captioning button on your bottom menu ribbon. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube channel, hopefully by Friday afternoon. At that time, I will also send out an email to all attendees with the video link and then this slide deck attached. So you will have all the resources available to you at any time in the future. With that, let us go ahead and talk about our objectives today. First off, the main thing we want to try and accomplish is incorporating accessibility into your workflow. So as you're developing your document and laying it out, you're thinking about how do I make sure this information that I'm trying to get out to everyone is reachable through multiple means, making sure that you're thinking about the needs of someone who is blind or who is deaf or who is colorblind as you're developing the document. The second objective is to make remediation easier without sacrificing your creativity. So in some cases, there are things we have to do after the document's made. So what can we do while we're making the document to make that step easier? And finally, presenting some solutions to common issues that we come across when we're developing documents, when we're remediating these things with Adobe Acrobat, in a PDF, any of those common issues. And then if you have any other issues that you want to talk about, you can add them to the Q&A. I will try and address them at the end of the presentation. And if we don't get to them, then you'll be able to reach out to me and I'll try and help you. So our philosophy and approach to accessible graphic design. First off, how are we going to communicate these ideas while we're primarily using visual concepts? A lot of the times, when we're creating like a flyer for an event or something, we're thinking about how can we draw people's eyes to this? How can we make sure it stands out amongst, other flyers or something? Or how do we make sure people read the information we need them to take away? But then we need to think about, okay, if this is going out in an email or if this is being posted on our website, how are people going to get that same information when they're not using their eyes, when they're using a screen reader or they're using a voice controlled software like Dragon? Any of those kinds of interactions do change how we need to communicate those ideas and making sure that visually it's still aesthetically pleasing, but we're still using the elements that we need to use for these assistive technologies to work. The second thing, what do we need to think about while designing a document? Color and visual aesthetics and use of space are very important parts of graphic design, but we also need to think about things like color blindness or how the text is presented on, against its background, where someone with red-green color blindness might not be able, there might not be high enough contrast that they can read the actual text. And then finally, the most important thing with any kind of graphic design document that you're putting out there is, what is our audience supposed to take away from this? So what is the important information that you're trying to communicate? And if you can't make the original accessible, what can you do in order to make sure that information is still reachable? With that, let us start with the basics. So we're starting, we're opening up our program, either Illustrator or InDesign or Publisher or Microsoft Word. I know the actual graphic designers just got hives when I said Microsoft Word, but I do need to cover it because these are, tools that have been used. So we want to make sure that we're covering our bases here. So you've opened up your program, you're starting, the absolute basics. You're saving your file, you're, setting up the print lines that you need, that kind of thing. Here are the three things you kind of need to consider as you're creating that document. First off, making sure that you have a descriptive name for your file, that it tells us, A, what is this file going to be used for? What is it trying to communicate? Is it a flyer for an event? Is it a brochure about your agency's new program? That kind of thing. If possible, like in InDesign or something, add a title and description. So that title is the very first thing that most assistive technology is going to read to a user when they open that document. So that needs to tell them exactly what this document is supposed to give them. The description is just as useful in most cases because it gives them, the highlights of it, or at least kind of the basic idea of what this is, this document is for. That's not always possible though. Sometimes that has to be done in post, but that's why you use the descriptive name for the file first. I would also recommend that you start labeling your version numbers if you're making a lot of changes or going back and forth with someone else in your agency or a customer. And then also later on, you might need to create a second version that you're going to make more accessible, or you're creating another version for a printer. So label which one is going to be your accessible version so that when you send it out to someone who's requesting that, you don't send them the wrong version. Second thing, margins and bleed marks. Typically, this does not affect accessibility. Your margins and your bleed marks are more used for printing purposes. However, it is important to be consistent with their use, because if you're changing those over time, that might change the reading order. Doesn't typically happen, but when you've adjusted the page size or the canvas size, and you move your margins around, you start moving elements around in order to use that space better, that can affect the reading order when you're sending it to Adobe Acrobat for a PDF version. And then finally, PDF compatibility. You're doing all this work in InDesign or Office, Microsoft Office. You don't want that to go to waste. So when you save your document to Acrobat PDF, you want to make sure that you're choosing the correct export option that enables that accessibility tagging. If you don't do that, all those headings or all that stylization you've done is gone and you have to redo it all over. So this is one of the big things to do. And I'll make sure to show you guys that near the end of the session. So now let's talk about the actual parts of your document and what you need to do to make those accessible. We're going to start with text. So we're going to talk about font type, font size, font spacing, print and digital needs, and then finally styles and headings. One of the important things with text here is that we want to make sure that text remains as text when we're creating our document. That'll come up more when we're talking about the print and digital needs, but short and sweet, you need to leave text as it is so that assistive technology interprets it as such. But we're going to talk about how stylized scripts, so anything that's like a cursive font versus regular font, things like spacing and leading and kerning, and then finally heading structures. So the first guideline to follow is you want to choose a font that has easily distinguishable characters. So a capital I and an L, in the case of the font that I'm using for this presentation, are extremely similar. There's only a slight difference in their height. Or a lowercase o and a number 0 look almost exactly the same. That is more important than using a sans serif or serif font. You'll find arguments on either side side of how a sans serif or a serif affects things like dyslexia and such, there's evidence for both. So really, it's more important that you make it very easily distinguishable. In some cases, maybe you need to play around with the fonts a little or play a little bit with spacing, create a little bit more space in between characters just so they're easily understood from each other. And then context can also affect this. If you're putting a 0 in a phone number, it's obviously going to be a number. But if you're doing something with like an event name and you're adding a number in it as well, then maybe you'll find that those are causing issues. So look at your document, make sure that people are able to distinguish those common overlaps like L and I or O and 0. Now, with accessibility, you'll often hear things like, here's a large print version of a flyer or a paper or what have you. If the actual numbers for that large print, according to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0, is either 14-point bold font or 18-point regular font. Either one is going to be your baseline for large print. Now, this is in the case of if you're working with like a normal letter size 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, or if you're working with anything that you're going to put on a website. If you're creating a banner that's going to stretch across an entire wall in a gymnasium, well, your font size really kind of doesn't matter then. But if you're working with anything that's going to be published digitally, or if you're creating a second version that's going to be large print, you're saying you're sending a flyer to a nursing home or assisted living place, or to try and reach senior citizens, that large print number you're trying to hit is either 14-point bold or 18-point regular. Now, if you're looking for the numbers for kerning or leading or spacing, the guidelines for those, you want to look to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1. This set of guidelines has ratios for those. For example, your line height should be 1.5 times font size. So if we're working with the 18-point regular font as large print, that means we need to take 9-point and add that to the 18-point for 27. So your line height should be 27-point total in font and space including. You can look at the other numbers. When I send the slide deck to you, it has the links to both of those. If you want to look onto your own, w3c.org, that is where the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are published. A lot of it deals primarily with websites, but it can be applied to things like PDFs and other kinds of documents. And so that's why we're looking to them for our guidelines here. Now, styles and headings. A lot of the times people use styles for visual appearance, drawing people's eye to important information on a flyer or something. But for our purposes, it's really, really important that you use the programmatic styles in the program you're using. If you're using Microsoft Office, the styles is on the home ribbon tab for most of the programs. If you're using something like InDesign or Illustrator, you might have a paragraph styles window that you can put anywhere inside your program. It's usually on the same window as the characters menu. These styles apply the tags that accessibility or assistive technology rather needs. If you've attended any of our other document training sessions, you'll know that tags are these like headings or paragraph tags that essentially tell assistive technology, this is what you should treat this element as. For our purposes, though, the key thing to remember is that just because you've selected one of these styles doesn't mean you can't change how it looks. You can also go into the program and save those styles or the changes you've made as a separate style so that it keeps the tag that you need to use, but then you don't have to go back and redo every single piece of text you've created. You can create the style, the look you want, but then also have the accessibility tag you need, and then just apply it to each part that you need to. Sometimes though, if we're starting in Illustrator, which doesn't have these paragraph styles. It might have the window, but it might not have the accessibility tags we need. And then we might have to do that either when we port it to InDesign or when we port it to PDF and we're using Acrobat Pro. So print and digital requirements. This is kind of where you're going to end up probably splitting your file into two separate types, because what the printer needs in order to generate your document is usually quite different from what you digitally need for a website or even just a PDF that you're putting on as a link. The print almost always works with the CMYK color values, and digital works with either RGB or hex color values. By and large, you can convert one to the other, but there might be slight differences in hue and such, and that might affect your contrast levels. So something to pay attention to when you split your document into whichever version you're creating. Whether you're starting with the print setup or the digital setup is largely dependent on you. It's honestly kind of the same amount of work either way. So that's really up to you and how comfortable you are working with one or the other. One thing I would recommend, though, is maybe starting with the digital side, because this next part is where you can do it one way, but you can't do it the other way. With digital, like I mentioned before, you need to have text fields and single shapes. So text fields where text is still treated as such. It's treated as, it has a field that has the words and characters in it as a single entity, and shapes where if you're using like background elements or color swatches or images, that they are treated as those single elements. Now, if you're sending this out to a printer, you need to change those into either outlines or vectors. And that's where text gets split apart into separate shapes and separate pieces. And assistive technology often struggles to treat those as, as words again. So if you have something like text there, where if that first T is a little bit spaced apart, when either Adobe Acrobat goes to interpret it or when a screen reader goes to interpret it, they might treat the T as separate from EXT. So you hear T X'd instead of text. And that's where, unfortunately, once you've created that outline or that vector, you can't go back and create it back into a text field. So that's why maybe starting with the digital side is a bit better for you. But if you've split your files already by this point, you might not have that issue. Finally, with print and versus digital is print, you're often referencing or linking files. In some cases, you're opening a file in a different one. Like in the case of Illustrator and InDesign, you can open an Illustrator file inside InDesign. It kind of runs the program inside InDesign. That actually doesn't really work for accessibility, because now you're relying on that second program to have the same information, the same tags that you need. It's not always the case. So with digital, we need to make sure that we're applying those programmatically associated styles. And in order to do that, we need this as a single whole file. Now, in the case of Illustrator and such, you can often embed these things, embed a file into another. So it treats it as one whole. That works for things like fonts and such, but when you go to port that into another program, it's usually better to export it and then pull it into the InDesign file or Office file or what have you, rather than simply loading the program in again. So now color. Color is our second main point of the day here. There are plenty of CMYK to RGB hex conversion or various other color converters out there. W3C has one that by and large has been very accurate, but you can find several other free ones available. So it's up to you. And those of you who are already graphics designers, I'm sure you've been dealing with these for forever and you have a favorite. If that works for you, by all means, be comfortable with it. I do recommend that you look into a color contrast analyzer. There are several out there as well, but Adobe has a nice one that will work for you if you're working with Illustrator or InDesign. Now remember that the contrast requirement for us, again, looking at the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0 minimum standard, is the 4.5:1 for most content. So any text below large print, if you're using large print, it has to be 3:1. Now that's only for text on a background. Things like a graphic design, like at the top of your flyer, or borders, or images, contrast doesn't apply there. Now, 2.1 and such will have standards for that, but you're really mostly concerned with your text and making sure that people can again get that important information without struggling. One thing to note here is that branding is exempt from the contrast requirement. So your logos don't need to meet these contrast values. Logos are considered part of branding. Branding is largely exempt from the WCAG guidelines because you're dealing with you're dealing with copyright and trademarks, and then B, also because it's more important that people understand that this is, in the case of like something like this presentation where we have the MDOD logo on it, that people understand this is from us, this is ours. So it's more important that information gets delivered than people get this long description of what that logo actually looks like. In a moment, I will be showing you guys the Adobe Color Contrast Analyzer, really useful tool. But I do want to point out that if you're working with Illustrator first, it does have a colorblind mode. However, it only shows the two most common red-green types. So if you're using a lot of blue and yellows in your document, Illustrator isn't going to help you there. So in that case, probably better off going with a different color contrast analyzer. So now let's go ahead and pull that up. So this is available from color.adobe.com. That's their whole color schematic here. If you notice, there's like color wheels, extract themes, extract gradients, so you can upload your document and it'll pull out the color schemes that you're using. If you are working with cloud, the Adobe Cloud, there is a lot of different tools you can use here to save like color palettes and transfer them across things and such. What we're concerned with are these accessibility tools. There's two of them. First off is the contrast checker. It only works with the WCAG 2.1 level, but for the most part, that contrast ratio is still the same. You have level AA or level AAA. That does change it though, because the AA is the 4.5:1 ratio. AAA is a 7:1 ratio. So be aware of that. If you want to meet the AAA standard, by all means, that's excellent. You will be an example across your agency. But for our purposes, the AA version is sufficient for meeting the Maryland Non-Visual Access Clause or the federal Section 508 standards. You can import colors from your document directly here, or if you already know your values, you can just put them into the text and background color. If you notice, it says, okay, we have our contrast ratio, 4.5:1. If you notice, here's your preview. So here's your text on your background. It also has like graphic components. So if you're using any icons or anything, and you're able to change their color, you can see if they're passing. That's really useful for things that are actionable. So if that icon is like your Facebook link or something, and a user can click it, that needs to meet the contrast requirements so that people know that it's there. And it'll show you that it passes for 17-point and below font. It's passing for 18-point and above, or 14-point bold and above, and passing for this. Now, if I drag this down, lower this contrast ratio to 3.4.6 or 3.46, you notice now it's failing for regular text, but still passing for large print text. That's that difference between the 3.0:1 contrast ratio and the 4.5:1. For most purposes, it's probably easier just to hit the regular text contrast ratio, because if you're passing that, you're passing all of them. But again, if you want to play with it, that is up to you. I'm not here to stifle your creativity. I'm just making sure you guys have the tools that you need in order to make sure that you're getting your information out there to everyone in the public. Now, there are suggestions here that you can use. You can apply them. Typically, it's either darkening or lightening both colors, or it's splitting them further apart, like the middle one. You can also just set a contrast ratio, and it'll just determine a color schematic for you. Or you can just click and drag the color bars here, and you can set whatever look you want. You can also save these to the cloud, and you can pull those into Illustrator or InDesign so that you can use that color palette at will rather than having to copy the numbers over if you need to. Second tool that's really useful is the colorblind save. So this gives us a color wheel, and then you can select the color mode. So if you're working with RGB, if you're working with hex, or if you're working with LAB, which I don't actually know what LAB is, but that's important here. I'll leave that to you guys. Nice thing here is that it gives you a set of 5 colors that you are selecting here, and then it shows you the difference with the 2 primary red-green versions of color blindness, Duranopia and Protanopia, and then the yellow-blue kind, which is Tritanopia. So you can see all 3 of the major colorblind types here. It also tells you here are the conflicts. So we know that color A and color C are in conflict. So we need to select one of these and move them apart until it says no conflicts found. Swatches are colorblind safe. So now we have enough contrast between all 5 colors that we don't have to worry about color blindness impacting people's ability to read our flyer or what have you. Again, you can save this as a color palette into Creative Cloud and port it into any of your programs that you're using. One other thing that I would like to show you is desktop inversion. This is a very useful tool for just quickly checking that nothing disappears when you don't have enough contrast. Some forms of blindness rely on inversion. If a person has lost their sight due to diabetes, that's a very common reason people need inversion. There are a ton of other conditions though that lead to it. For our purposes, it's a very quick test for finding anything that disappears, like a border or an outline around something. That's one of the most common things to disappear because it doesn't have enough contrast. If you're working in Windows, it is found in the settings in ease of access. This is available in the preferences on Mac if you're using that. I believe it is in display there as well. Once we've clicked ease of access, we want to go down to color filters. We want to turn it on, then select inverted. Now, you probably aren't seeing the change on your end because when this applies, it's kind of like a screen has been put over your monitor. So it doesn't usually transfer across, sharing or something, but, feel free to give this a try and see how it looks. But you'll be able to see how the colors shift when they're inverted. You can see how if you have a gray outline around a button or something, that might disappear because your background was white, but now that shifted to black. But if it's a gray outline, it might just become a darker gray, and then suddenly you have dark gray and black. You don't need to go into great depth with that. It's really just for a quick visual scan after you've created your document to make sure that nothing just vanishes on you. And if it does, making sure that it's not important, that it was just something like a border or something that was meant to draw attention. So that's color in a nutshell. So let's talk about images now. First thing, as per any accessibility webinar you have ever attended, always add alt text. Or if you're able to, mark something as decorative or an artifact. That an artifact is Adobe's way of saying this is a background image and is not important for people's use. The nice thing about Adobe is that you can do that. You can do that in either InDesign or in Acrobat Pro. So that way, if it's something like a border underlining the title of your document on a flyer, or it's like a flourish at the bottom to add a little bit of color, those kind of things don't communicate information to a screen reader or assistive technology users. It doesn't give them anything because for their purposes, that's just noise. So you can get that out of their way and give them a more streamlined user experience. Unfortunately, with Microsoft Office, you can't do that. So in those cases, when you port it to PDF, you're going to have to do that after the fact, or you have to fill in the alt text as decorative so that users at least know I can skip this. One thing that has been really useful when you're working with Illustrator and in InDesign is flattening complex images or vectors into a single layer. That makes these elements or these different parts into a single image when you're moving into Acrobat Pro, so that when you go to tag it, you can tag it as just a single image. If it's multiple layers or things stacked on top of each other, Adobe might try to pull those apart. So if you have like a color bar that has a shadow mask over top of it, when you go to tag it, it might pull that mask out and make it a separate thing. And now you have this kind of grayish square over your text and your color bar that makes it not at all what you wanted it to look like. So if you make those a single piece, it's a lot easier after the fact. That leads into the next point where, if possible, try to avoid overlapping or combining overlapped, or if you need to, combine those overlapped elements into a single one. We usually don't like to use images of text because that's harder for assistive technology to work with. But in some cases where you put text on like a color bar, kind of as like a flag to start a chapter or something in a brochure, sometimes it has to become an image so that we can appropriately tag it and add that text into the alt text so that users can get that. Because if we try to make it text and a background element together, occasionally Acrobat Pro won't interpret that correctly, or it will, but suddenly it's moved the color bar over top the text because it's thinking, oh, this is separate reading order, I need to move these around. And when you try to move them back again, its visual layer versus its reading order layer are in conflict. And then you start having this problem of trying to move one or the other, and then it causes the other part of it to swap. Another useful thing in InDesign is you can anchor images in the reading order. So you can have a text box, and then you can draw a line from the image to the text box so that that image is associated with the text box. So when the text is read, the image is read right immediately after that text box. This plays also into Microsoft Office, where we want to avoid using out-of-line wrapping. So what that means is any of the kind of floating types, so that lets you move it around, great for visual, but that means now that a screen reader or other assistive technology isn't able to interpret where that's supposed to be in relation to text. So that's why we want to use inline text wrapping when we can. Just a quick couple examples of the alt text menus. Acrobat Pro, if you have to have the paid version in order to do this. I should have mentioned that earlier. You cannot do these things in the free version. The free version can still interpret it correctly and still will be useful for those using assistive technology, but you can't do this work without the paid version. So in the accessibility tool of Acrobat Pro, there is a button saying set alternate text. It will open up a small dialog window. It'll list all the images you have, and you can just click through and add alternate text to each one, or click the checkbox saying decorative figure and mark it as such. That will turn it into an artifact, and so screen readers will skip them. In InDesign, it's actually listed as object export options. And that's where we can add alt text. Now, if you're putting in an image or something that has metadata that applies the alt text, you can use the alt text source in order to use that information. But in most cases, it's better to just use custom. Reason for that is because that way you can type in what you want as alt text in the case of something acting as like a link. So that image in the example is tagged as MDTAP logo. If that instead went to the website as a link, I should change that to MDTAP website or MDTAP homepage. It also gives options for the tagged PDF when you're converting from InDesign to PDF, or when you're porting it to an ePublished document or an HTML document. Give me just a moment. Okay, so infographics and data visualization. You're creating a flyer or something to post on maybe Twitter, infographic giving statistics of a population in Baltimore, let's say, or you're creating a data guide and you're creating a bunch of charts and visualizations to explain how rates and housing interests are changing. These are difficult to make accessible because you're dealing with a lot of information in one thing that you can't put into the alt text of the image because there's a character limit on there. And then also you don't want people highlighting that image and then listening to a minute-long spiel about it, that if they interrupt, they have to listen to the entire thing again. So in these cases, we have to usually provide that information in another manner. First, in the alt text of that infographic or that data table or chart, provide a summary of the important information. So give them the name of that chart, give them what's supposed to be telling them, and then if you can, put the data values associated with that infographic or the chart in separate text fields so that they can be tagged, but the actual image or chart can be skipped. I'll show you an example in a bit of how that would look, but this would allow at least assistive technology to be able to read the data points and form those comparisons along with the summary, rather than trying to force them to read a chart that's not going to read in the right order no matter what you do. The third thing to be aware with these things is that you need to make sure that you're not just using color as the only method of providing meaning. So if you're creating a bar chart of 3 different companies and their incomes, each of those bars for each different company needs to have something else identifying them more than just color. So you have to either use an icon or you have to use texture like dashed lines in a blue color for the company number 1, and then red and dots for company number 2. The way that looks is this example here. I'll be also handing out a document, or the document that this came from, so you can use it as an example and something to play around with. Is we've tagged this document using Adobe Acrobat Pro, and you can see the reading order on screen. It is a little messed up because the purpose of this is to show you later how you can change the reading order. But for our purposes here, we have a pie chart with 4 data points. The pie chart itself does not have a gray box around it, indicating that it is skipped by screen readers. It's not read aloud. However, the data points are. So data point number 1, and then its number 16% are read first, then data point 2, then 3, then 4. This way, screen reader still is able to hear the 4 data points, and alongside a summary that's either in text below the chart, or maybe it's above the chart, either way works. They are able to draw the same conclusions that a sighted person can. In addition, even though each slice of the pie chart is colored, we have a line connecting the data point to its respective slice. That way, someone who is, let's say, red-green colorblind, so data points 1 and 4 might not appear the same way to them or might not have enough contrast. They at least have a line associating data point 1 with its part and data point 4 with its part. So with that, we have the basics of what applies to everything in every document you guys are going to be working on. So let's talk a little bit about Adobe's process. The reason I'm going to be I'm so focused on Adobe's process is because it's still kind of the industry standard for graphic design and what have you. Whenever people are thinking about these kind of things, they're thinking Photoshop or Illustrator or InDesign when they're creating flyers for events and such. Nowadays, people are starting to try and branch out and break away from Adobe and using other kinds of programs. I can't really get into all of those, but I would encourage you to see what tools that those programs have that accomplish the same things here. So with Illustrator, that's where we're focusing on our graphics and our color and making sure our images are flattened into single layers, making sure our color contrast is matching, that we're using an accessible palette. If we're dealing with vectors, that we're making sure that text is text, or real text as HTML likes to call it, and that we are solidifying A, the look we want, but then B, making sure that it's set up for the next two steps being easier. Now, either you're going from Illustrator to InDesign, or you've started with InDesign. InDesign is a great point where we can start adding those tags, where we can identify elements as either text or images or background artifacts or headings or what have you. We can also determine the reading order that's going to be used by a screen reader or other assistive technology using the article panel. We can also add alt text to our images here. And finally, we can deal with the document metadata like that title and description we mentioned on the first part of the demonstration here. Now, anything that we haven't accomplished here, we can finally do in Acrobat Pro when we're dealing with the PDFs. So dealing with that document metadata, if we couldn't earlier, any additional tags that need to be put in or need to be adjusted. Sometimes Acrobat will tag things that don't need to be tagged, like a line drawn between two blocks of text. Not just because the auto tag system just found it and was like, hey, here, you might want to go and delete that because it doesn't add anything of value. And then finally, double checking our reading order to make sure that all the work we've done before is still there when we're in a PDF, and that it's reading in the order we want people to read our document in. Acrobat Pro, if it doesn't have a reading order assigned to it, we'll try and create a reading order on its own. And that will typically be in the language that you're using, in our case, English. So left to right, top to bottom. That might not be how you want someone to read it. So double check the reading order there. InDesign, as I mentioned, you have those paragraph styles that apply the heading and paragraph tags. You can determine the reading order in the articles panel. Really useful because that way you know exactly how a screen reader is going to read your document. And then you can also attach images to text using the anchoring, as we mentioned. And then you have the context menu. So if you right click on something, you can tag it. You can make images, obviously images, or you can make them artifacts. Again, those background things that get skipped because they're not giving us any value other than visual appeal. If you're dealing with any tables for whatever reason, making sure that you're creating those header rows and then you're applying the correct tags so that it's interpreted as a table, and that the associations between the top cells or the first column with the data points are communicated to the user so they don't have to try and figure that out themselves. And then finally, the dialogue and bookmarks panel, adding that title and the description. And if you're making a really long document, you put in some bookmarks because you want to make sure people have the ability to skip that. That's just useful in general for anyone. That's not particular to accessibility. It's just a better user experience. So now I have a short video I created about InDesign. This is captioned. And this is available. It is an unlisted video on YouTube. So when I send you guys the slide deck, you should still have access to this video if you need it. If for whatever reason you don't, please let me know and I'll try and get it to you.
On screen is an example document created using InDesign and Illustrator. We'll start with paragraph styles. First, we use an existing style and apply it to a later heading, and then we will create a new one. First heading, example document, is styled as a heading 1. It has a plus symbol next to the style name to show it has been modified since the original style was applied. Below, chart demonstration heading 2 was used to make the heading 2 style. The paragraph in between uses the basic paragraph style that is on by default. Scrolling down, there is text placed here meant to be headings, but is not yet. To change this, we can apply an existing style. By selecting the Paragraph Styles panel and clicking the Heading Level 2 paragraph style, this text is now set to be a heading. For the next heading, it's meant to be a Level 3 heading. We do not have an existing style to use, so we have to make one. First, set the desired look. Then select the text box and click Create New Style. This will create Paragraph Style 1. Double-clicking this option will open the Paragraph Styles menu. There are a number of options here for various formatting purposes, but we want to look at the last option in the list, Export Tagging. In this tab, we will change the name of the style to Heading 3 and change the tag for it in both EPUB, HTML, and PDF documents. Select the tag you want to use in both submenus, in this case, Heading 3. Now, let's tag the images. We'll start with the second image because we want the chart to be a background artifact. Select the MDTAP logo and go to the Objects menu. Click the Object Export Options list item and a new dialog will open. The first tab is where we'll enter alt text. It's currently filled in with custom alt text since the other options pull from other areas such as file metadata, which we don't have. Now the next tab will affect its text when exporting to a PDF. We'll leave it to use the tag from the structure of the document, but we'll switch the text source to custom and add the alt text again. This is to ensure proper labeling. Other helpful features are the auto tag and tag frame from the context menu. By auto tagging another frame initially, we can then tag other frames as the same thing or change their tags. Select in Structure opens the Structure sidebar, which should look the same as the one in Adobe Acrobat. Text is typically entered as story, and images are entered as images. It is recommended to make sure to tag everything in the structure so that it is properly exported to PDF. To mark something as a background element, we'll use the Object Exports Options menu again. This time, we'll select using the artifact tag, which will prevent it from being in the reading order. To anchor an image, click and drag the solid blue square on the top of the frame to another frame. This will place them together in the Articles panel. The Articles panel determines reading order. It can be opened from the window menu. To add a frame to it, either select the frame and click Add Selection to Articles, or drag the frame into the panel. The new article dialog will open where you can add the name of the panel. By default, Include when exporting is checked. It also gives an explanation of how the reading order is determined by the article order. Finally, when creating a table, make sure to add a header row. If a table is created without one, the Properties menu has a tab for adding header and footer rows. The header row is more important since that is a separate tag in the structure.
Okay. So now let me go quickly over let me quickly go over Acrobat Pro. Now we go into this a lot in our document accessibility webinars. If you've seen them before, I've run one, Andrew Drummond has run several, the NFB Center for Excellence in Non-Visual Access has run several. All of them will give you a lot more overview into Acrobat Pro's accessibility better than I will here. I'm just going to quickly go into some of the basic stuff such as the reading order. So we can determine the reading order with the order panel. So in accessibility, you click reading order, dialog will open, and you want to click show order panel. That'll show on the left here. And if you notice, all of our elements on the document will have a gray box drawn around them if they're tagged. And that is the reading order. Those numbers tell us, okay, this example 1, heading 1 is the first thing read, then it runs through the paragraph. But if you notice, heading 2 is all the way down at 13. So that didn't export correctly when it generated this. In order to change that in the reading order panel on the left, I can click it and then drag it up to number 6 or above number 6 between 5 and 6. Click there, and now it is in the correct order. So if you need to make those adjustments, you can do so quickly using that left panel menu. In this case, if I wanted the chart to actually be a tagged thing, what I'd have to do then is I will need to click and drag a box around it. And it'll highlight all the different elements there. And then I can use one of these options here to tag it as what I want. In this case, I will choose figure because that makes it an image. If I want that to be a background element instead, I would click it and then I would click background artifact. Now, in this case, because I've done that, I need to make sure to set the alternative text because now that's an image again. So I need to go in here. Now, if I didn't tag it as a background element, I can do so here instead as a decorative figure, or I can say pie chart for 4 data points comparing visual styles. So I can add the alt text there, give a quick summary of what this is meant to do, and then I can put it in the reading order. I can either have it start before, in this case, I'll need the heading to be above it because that. So 6, 7, then you go into the data points so that all the data points are read after the chart so that you get the summary first, then the data points, and then you can draw your own conclusions using assistive technology. That's the most important thing for our purposes here. If you're dealing with something with like overlaps or with other kinds of documents there, that's when you start having to play with the reading order, or you might need to, in this case, show in the tag panel, which would be on the left here. And then I have the document, and then I can kind of see where the tags are and how they're in the reading order. So this tag panel is how are things classified. Now, when a screen reader opens this document, since we've set a reading order, it's going to use this reading order instead of the tag panel. Now, I have 2 versions of this created with the structure panel and the article panel, 2 different things in InDesign. When I pull it open with the reading order, if you notice, it's pretty much the same reading order. So that means since I did the work in InDesign for the structure panel and the article panel to both be in the correct order, I didn't have to worry about which version I'm creating. If you instead only use the article panel or only use the structure panel, when you export it from InDesign, you need to make sure that you're using the one that you put the reading order in. Final thing that I want to show you with this, I'm going to quickly open Word document. Just going to write text document here because I need to save it. Oops, okay, apologies. There we go. So in Word, and this works with Excel or what have you, when you click Save as Adobe PDF, you get the Save dialog here. You want to go to Options and make sure you check this box, Enable Accessibility and Reflow with Tagged Adobe PDF. Doing that means all the work that you've done in word, like let's say we've changed this into a heading, and so programmatically that's a heading, screen reader will interpret it as a heading. Using that option in the save menu, that will go into a PDF as a heading. If I do not click that checkbox, when this moves over to Adobe PDF, it's just treated as part of the whole document and sort of the whole piece. It'll try and treat it either as an image, or since there's no tags, it might try to generate text out of that and it might not interpret it correctly. So that's why we want to make sure that we put in that option. Okay. Oop. I want the slide. There we go. All right, some other quick tips before we wrap up today. If you generate your PDF and you find a spelling error, or you're updating your version from 2022 to 2023, you can edit that PDF in InDesign or Illustrator without losing your existing work. You can open a specific page that you need to make a change. You can make that change, and most of the time it'll be interpreted correctly when you save it, and then the tags and such will interpret it like the text as such. If you're making like a large structural change, like you're changing out an image or a graph or something, in that case, you might need to go back and double check the reading order or that image is tagged appropriately. But you don't have to redo all of the PDF. You can just redo that one page. So it saves you a lot of time in the long run if you're consistently changing a document over time. If you're linking files, like we mentioned earlier, you're opening an Illustrator file in an InDesign file, or you're opening an Excel sheet and generating a table, a data set that you send to Illustrator, that's probably going to require post-production tagging. If possible, maybe export it either like as an image or as a PDF, and then open it in that and such, because that'll let you do the tagging and put it in appropriately, or copy paste data and just create it in InDesign in a single file. If you're doing a lot of data importing or scripting in order to move like a data guide or something from your agency that's going to be released to the public, and you made it really aesthetically pleasing, but you're using scripting to move data from like Excel to Illustrator to generate data sets, it might be possible for you to actually import those tags. Excel is fairly accessible, but Illustrator is not. So depending on how you're moving data, if you can, maybe skip Illustrator for that point and generate just the look there, but then pull the data from Excel so that those tags still go with it. But that's going to need research depending on how you or what script you're using and how your workflow is. One example I've come across is someone using Excel sheets that hold the data, the raw data, but then Illustrator is actually creating the data set and the charts and such. Because you're using Illustrator kind of as your base platform for generating that, you can't add those accessibility tags. But it might be possible if you go from Excel into InDesign or something, since they both use those accessibility tags, you might be able to do it there. And finally, experiment. It's more important to provide all the important information than it is to use the exact element on screen. Sometimes, in some cases, because we're having trouble with tagging something, or like if you tag like text that's sitting on top of a color bar, and then Adobe wants to move the color bar in front of it, well, we can try and either tag both together as a figure, or we can ignore the actual text and color bar entirely and create maybe an empty, like required form field that is read-only next to it that visually is near indistinguishable from anything else, won't print, so you won't get like a color discoloration or something on there, but a screen reader will find that form field and give us the information. So sometimes you just need to play around with some options out there in order to make it accessible without using the exact element that you were initially using to communicate that. Some additional resources that you guys will be getting when I send this to you. Adobe has their accessible PDF guide, covers Acrobat, covers InDesign. Covers the rest of their suite as well if you're using any other parts. If you want some good information on font styles and making sure your text is accessible, the APA style organization has a typography list of accessibility. They're kind of the ones I quoted with the whole sans serif versus serif. There's other people who have said that. It's just a good base guideline for these kind of things. And then finally, if you're dealing with data visualization, because in some cases we just cannot make the PDF accessible, and in those cases you have to provide that information elsewhere and provide a link to it, HTML actually is a fairly good way of doing that. So setting it up on a website or even just a standalone page or something, providing that link, digital.gov has a really good explanation of how to do that for different kinds of tables and such, even complex tables where you have a second table inside a first one for a subset of information. They can make that accessible and show you how. One final thing to be aware of, SAS Graphics, sorry, has developed a method of providing data in a way that uses audio tones, such as a piano scale, to indicate comparisons. So, if you're comparing like incomes across, a county or something, and you're running it through their system, you'll hear a low tone, and then, for somewhere else that you'll hear a higher tone, like a C note versus an E note, and that'll indicate your comparison there. There is another group that is doing something similar like this. All of this is in the kind of experimental stage. People are exploring ideas of how to make these things more accessible in a easier manner. So this might be something to look into if you're interested, or just keep an eye on, because we're moving towards a better world in this area. So making sure that you're aware of what tools are out there and if they will work for you. With that, we have our contact information on screen. You can email us at mdod.nva@maryland.gov. That reaches both myself and my supervisor, Andrew Drummond, who's the director of the IT Access Initiative. You can visit our website at mdod.maryland.gov. You can also watch any of our previous webinars on our YouTube channel. Username is MDTAP video. Or if you haven't already, please subscribe to our newsletter so that you will be aware of upcoming webinars and other information about accessibility that's coming out. With that, I need to make sure that I get my menu back. And that is the end of our presentation. So with that, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in chat, or if you want, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you to try and address that directly. Okay, we have flattening complex images. Is that called rasterizing, or am I thinking of something different? You were thinking of something different. Rasterizing is typically that is usually when you are treating or changing that into like an outline or a vector or something. Flattening complex images, I'm usually referring to when you're making it a single piece. So not grouping, not rasterizing. It's more like either in the layers menu, you're making it all on a single layer, or in some cases, it's where you create the thing and then export it and then pull it back into your program as a single element. Let's see, okay. Should make sure. Yeah, everyone can chat with everyone now. Okay, we are 5 minutes over. So if there are no further questions, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. As I have stated, this is recorded, so it will be posted to our YouTube channel, hopefully by Friday. And at that point, I will also send an email out to all of you with the link with the slideshow and the other handouts and any other information that might come up. If people email me with questions, I'll make sure everyone gets the answers. With that, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our ASL interpreter and our captioner today. And I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.